Every otaku date ever. Continuing right from where we left off last week, Tojima and Yuriko had arrived at the convenience store where the Shocker Trooper appeared. Both went through their quote-unquote henshin, which, yeah, gotta give it to Yuriko for having the bear sequence inspired for using some animation. I mean, at the very least, she's sacrificing a lot of buttons in the process. The words of every true cosplayer ever, unfortunately. But yeah, after dealing with his lackeys, Nakao was left alone with his personal idol in an actual member of Shocker, albeit their equivalent of a stormtrooper. Granted, I'll still take a random trooper over any of the main characters of Star Wars these days. Still the only thing to ever come out of the sequel trilogy. But yeah, I did kind of feel for the dude here. I mean, when it comes to long-running franchises like Kamen Rider, there's bound to be an Oshi for everyone, and his was Shocker even when they weren't the best of role models. Thus, we really shouldn't judge even when he gets his ass kicked, as this was still probably the happiest moment of his life. Ironically enough, the same kind of applied for Tojima, albeit for different reasons, as now he could properly fight evil rather than just some street-level punks. And I will say, probably the funniest bit of this whole scene was the trooper's expression of pure confusion, as all these weirdos took a strange fascination over a dude in a gimp costume. Anyway, Tojima managed to have a decent exchange with him, which makes sense as, while most tokusatsu foot soldiers have been shown to have above average human strength, they still can be challenged by decently strong humans, especially ones who can take on freaking bears. And I think Tojima could have sold him, but Yuriko wanted her turn, and I love how the BGM instantly switched between their respective themes. Also, something I really should have pointed out last week was how Yuriko's tackle was not only her take on the character, but also on pro wrestling. Yeah, for those who are complaining that she was showing a little too much skin, this is honestly pretty typical Joshi Pro Rescuer. Hell, it could be even more over the top, so she was actually showing a little restraint. And thankfully, she didn't hold back on the wrestling moves, as after pulling off a really nice overhead kick, Yuriko transitioned into a dragon suplex. Better than anything the Young Bucks do these days. With that, they defeated the trooper, but as it turned out, there was one more guy who was a bit more on the Toshiki Inoue side of edgy villains, as not only did he seemingly kill off some random IRL streamer, thanks by the way, he also disposed of the Shocker Trooper, both by way of the classic bubble dissolving method. It was of course implied that he was a Shocker Kaijin who was definitely a level above that rando they just beat. Understandably kind of shell-shocked by the whole experience, the two regrouped at a family restaurant, where the manager ended up taking an interest in their conversation after they just showed up in their costumes, which to be fair is typical fare during con season. So okay, before we continue, why don't we take a quick minute to compare this show's twists with ones from a couple of other shows that are on the opposite ends of the entertainment spectrum for me. First, there's Samurai Flamenco, and the twist that I frankly think ruined their show. Obviously, spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen the show, but it's over a decade old, and really, it's not that good anyway. Samurai Flamenco featured the title character who, much like Tojima, decided to become a vigilante in the vein of main tokusatsu heroes like Kamen Rider and Super Sentai. Both men, in turn, became slightly more positive versions of Mark Miller's Kick-Ass, which was pretty welcome in such a cynical landscape, and did have some decent commentary on what true heroism can be for the average guy. But then the 7th episode happened. What? 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 Yeah, not only did the show go through a very sudden shift into being actual superhero stuff, it went through some constant tonal shifts. At times, it would be a tongue-in-cheek parody of tokusatsu, and at other times, it would be an overly serious and edgy mess. Yeah, the gorilla guillotine was certainly something, but the show's inability to pick a tone really threw me off, along with some really wonky animation, though that is more indicative of a defunct animation company. So with all that in mind, you would think this twist would bother me just as much as it did with Flamenco. Well, no. For one thing, this twist happened at the end of the last episode, which was just its second. Therefore, they really hadn't built up any significant status quo, which you would do around the 3rd episode of most shows, hence the 3-episode rule. Second, more than flamenco, this show actually reminds me more of another production parodying toy properties, whilst also having heavy involvement from them, Unofficial Sentai Akiba Ranger, which is one of my favorite TV shows of all time period. It was a show about a bunch of otaku who would try to live out their delusions of becoming an official Super Sentai, which eventually they actually would. And it also featured a twist of fiction becoming reality in about their 6th episode, so yeah, kind of close to Flamenco's 7th. However, I would argue there was a lot of foreshadowing to this episode as early as the 2nd episode, so it didn't feel anywhere near as out of nowhere as the monkey. Hell, it was clear from the very first episode that they were dealing with some sci-fi concepts to live out their delusions, so really, it just felt like the next logical step, like it does with this show, I'd argue. So yeah, as long as the twist just isn't out of nowhere or breaks the established tone of the series, I really don't see a problem with it, and I think both of these shows pulled it off really well. Anyway, Mitsuba here revealed that he himself had a run-in with Shocker. Of course, our heroes wanted to hear his story, until they heard how long it was, and while Tojima wanted to stick around, Yuriko wanted to back out. Yeah, I kind of love how she's the straight man to all of this stuff, in spite of also dressing up like a WWE reject. It does show how all of these characters approach tributing their favorite characters very differently. Anyway, Mitsuba's backstory went back to when he and his brother were kids. They had befriended some hippie dude who was really obsessed with growing vegetables, to the point that his garden started to grow out of control, resulting in his neighbors hiring some yakuza to try and close him down. And even after offering up some of his produce, they still beat him up. Okay, so I think we all know what's gonna happen next. Okay, maybe not exactly that. Yeah, I'll admit, this is both a hilarious and yet also kind of tragic little twist. In terms of the former, I actually like this subverting of expectations with the dude who did kind of look like a show writer, and of course the Yakuza who acted like they were with Shocker, turning out to be the exact opposite. However, in terms of the latter, you do kind of have to feel bad for the trooper, who was probably just trying to live a normal life after likely leaving Shocker, and yet that was all taken away from him. It does show that these guys are people too. With that, and even though Mitsuba wanted to continue his story, he was pulled away by his waitress, who also happened to be his girlfriend, Yukarisu. Actually, I think she's gonna tell Laura that Manatsu is cheating on her. Well, we would actually learn a little bit more about her the following day, as the two former Precure went to the same school. Though, and also that Four Eyes was still around and lusting over his teacher and now imagining a full-on hentai scenario with her. Yeah, Mr. Kaijin, can we borrow some of your poisonous needles? But yeah, after revealing that she was their waitress, Yukarisu also revealed a little bit more about herself, including how she was a bit of a yandere for Mitsuba. Understandably, Yuriko wanted no part of this, until we ended the episode with yet another shocking reveal.
Boy, that escalated quickly.
This was a 3rd episode that really showed the importance of that rule. It very effectively established the legitimate threats that our heroes will have to deal with going forward, whilst also developing each of them. Not to say it was all just edgy action, as thankfully the show has also not forgotten its over-the-top comedic roots. As we all went over, while the twist that Shocker was real all along is drastic, it's also far from unwelcome. The fact they did this within the first 3 episodes of the show meant that they were still establishing the status quo, and this development was just a part of that rather than just coming out of nowhere. It gives our protagonists something to overcome whilst also keeping focus on developing them in very entertaining ways. Again, one of the best parts of the show is just seeing how differently everyone expresses their love in relationship to Kamen Rider. From Tojima wanting to fully experience being a rider, to Yuriko just wanting to keep Tako's legacy alive, and thus not wanting to keep up with everyone else's extra baggage. And yes, Yukarisu has her own unique yandere expressions of love, which makes the reveal that she's a Shocker Trooper all the more fitting when her boyfriend is another Kamen Rider fanboy. Though on that note, it is also interesting to learn that there might be a little bit more to these simple foot soldiers. Guys like the gardener seem like they just want to live out normal lives, while Yukarisu clearly has interests outside of their organization at least. It certainly makes me really interested in how they might develop these troopers, because overall, this is just a very effective third episode that managed to establish a lot of significant setting details. While the writers remained the stars of the show, the Shocker Troopers of all people were no slouches, and certainly lived up to their name. Thanks for watching, and if you don't want to get cancelled, please do not imitate the Shocker salute, and also may watch our videos. We've got something new coming out almost every day, and maybe some longer form stuff coming out next month. We'll see how things pan out. Look forward to Idol Precure coming up next, and until then though, for now my friends, and... Nope, I think that's our neighbor wanting to share some of his produce with us. Hold on. Why do you always have to do that?